I think what's most fascinating about your story and experiences is you think at a very high level, and you're thinking of like whole city economic and cultural development.
And the goal was to sell tickets for the Bulls.
In seeing that as a precursor to residential real estate development and critical mass, it's interesting because Max and I both got in kind of at the peak or the first peak of maybe many other peaks in terms of like residential being extremely hot. Now, it obviously helped that interest rates were extremely low, 3%. And, you know, it was real estate was all the rage at the time. But Indianapolis was kind of like hot and like nationally had a focus. And that's when we started. And it's almost all we ever knew in real estate. Whereas you were kind of watching in the shadows all this come up. I want to go back to your story, though. I know you used to live not downtown.
Right.
And then you tried to make that move. Could you walk us through that transition in your life?
Sure. So I originally, when we moved our company from Rose Hellman's incubator to the Circle, I originally lived at Gardens and Canal Court right there because, again, it was Riley Towers or the canal, right?
Yep.
And then, you know, after about a year and a half, I bought a home up on the Northwest side, on a city course. Hey, great. I think I paid
Doing what everyone does, right?
$50K. You're right.
Get out the burbs.
And then as I started to get into real estate as Fountain Square became, the Wrigleyville I was going to go engage in, from a place of investment real estate. I started spending more time there. And there were two elements that really struck me. One, you had a neighborhood here that had a very relationally oriented culture, right? Front porch culture. People knew each other. The businesses that launched got community support by the neighbors. You had, people would say hi, introduce themselves, engage. I found that tremendously powerful. I think it was also driven largely by necessity because as that neighborhood vacated, coming out as, it was the entertainment district, the theater district of the 1920s and 30s that started in the 50s to see a downslide, vacate out, and 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to get by, right? You had to come together. You had to know each other. You had to be willing to, engage. It largely became a, multi-generational, neighborhood with a high concentration of poverty. But the cultural thread there, the element was very appealing because nobody had a qualm about walking up, introducing themselves and engaging. The other reality that we saw was there were a lot of kids out. Didn't matter if it was 10 in the morning, 11 at night, and their families weren't it wasn't that they didn't care. You had a lot of single moms. You had a lot of young parents. You had a lot of people who going through hard stuff who were just trying to get by, working two jobs, trying to put together anything that they could. And, we felt at that point that one of the ways that we could make an impact was to move down and establish a life in Fountain Square and have an impact. Now, we did that very idealistically and very ignorantly. And we spun our wheels for a few years, really trying to help our neighbors. We just did not understand how people with a different background and story than ours were motivated, engaged, in their kind of day-to-day perspective and matrix through which they live their lives. And so at the end of 3 years of, living in Fountain Square and looking at kind of 3 years of failure from that lens, my wife and I just did a postmortem and said, okay, this is either an experiment that we learned a lot, but, failed at, or this is a phase 2 where we need to make some significant changes. And at that point, what we decided, we came to a determination that we did not, again, we were ignorant. We did not understand how we could have a sustainable community impact in our neighborhood. And we had a proximity issue. I was still traveling around the U.S., half the month. My wife was still working in Carmel, every day, Monday through Friday. And so we made a determination to tighten up the radius of our lives to, 5-mile radius of our home and go look for a career opportunity with organizations who had a sustained impact within our neighborhood. I ended up over at Shepherd Community Center, running their fundraising department, an organization that serves the Near East Side and has now for, I believe, 30 years. And Gabby ended up over at the Oaks Academy at the Brookside campus as they were getting launched. And it was tremendously impactful. And what we learned was not only how do we have an impact in our community to those who need a hand up the most, we learned how does a donor, a volunteer, a program member, how does that ecosystem come together and meet the needs and hopes that everybody's stepping into there. We learned a lot about sustainable community development and how to take how to introduce enough margin to sustainably do worthwhile things. And I think that was a big miss before, was we just didn't think enough about the margin necessary to endure.